Living in some small village between heaving green hills and old whispering wood was a kind-hearted farmer, Thomas, who worked all day and all night with his loving wife, Mary, and 3 sons, Marcus, Peter, and small little David, in a desperate attempt to keep their family fed, and the honest, back-breaking effort on their small farm, with thin soil and old-fashioned animals, and the one frosty winter morning as they sought firewood in the forest, where icicles dangled like crystal daggers on bare limbs, and which they had found in the snow-covered forest, Thomas felt great, deep pity fill his heart. And though his family were desperately hungry, and his children with their sunken features and hollow stomachs kept him awake at night thinking of them, he delicately loosened the terrified bird with his frozen, trembling fingers. And as he did so, he stroked its warm feathers and kept murmuring in its calming, comforting voice, and a voice as sweet as bells, saying, "Kind farmer with the generous heart, thou saved my life when thou might easily have taken it to feed thy starving children." And in gratitude of this pure, self-sacrificing act, Thomas could scarcely believe his ears, and with great care took the warm goose home in his tender arms in the snow. And when he stormed into the cottage door and told Mary of the wonderful promise he had fully expected, she was quite incredulous, until the following morning, when the golden light blazed in through their frosty window, and they had a perfect golden egg in the nest, groveling and beatifically with the magic light. And they wept with the great joy in their hearts at holding it in their trembling hands. They ran into the village goldsmith, Wilhelm, who examined it and found it pure, solid gold, worth to feed their family at least a month. And each morning, without failure, the magic goose laid one perfect golden egg that flashed a little and then hardened. And Thomas and Mary made the best use they could of it through Wilhelm, which bought them nutritious food and warm woolen clothes and stout boots, and had their leaky roof and broken windows fixed, and gradually led their family out of abject poverty. And they treated the goose with great love and much gratitude, which broke through and grew stronger every day. But as months wore on, and the comfort increased, and his elder brother Marcus, who had ever been the most impatient and the most greedy of the 3 brothers, and jealous of his younger brothers, and resenting it that his father could not give him extra money to waste on gambling and drinking in the village tavern, began to get irritated, watching his father take his time in picking out but one solitary golden egg on any one day. And dark, poisonous thoughts started to creep into his selfish mind like thorny, choking weeds. And he began to think that he heard himself saying all around him that, but Thomas at first answered exactly, "No," and all of the horror of hell in his eyes recollected the wise words of the goose, that he should never allow greed to enter his heart, and that he felt more than thankful and more than loving than ever to the magic creature who had saved his family out of starvation and given it its dignity. And he worked on his father day after day and week after week, and planted the seeds of doubt and desire, and painted pictures of amazing riches, and he really began to wonder in his dark, sleepless nights whether she could, with one great leap, clear onto the other. And after many weeks of constant manipulation and pressure, and his own growing doubts gnawing at his mind, at last, Thomas was able to resolve his determination, and the ice began to melt like spring, and his old, innocent heart started to harden with horrid greed, like frost on a window. And he began to avoid the goose and its trusting, loving eyes, a process that grew steadily more painful, until one dark, moonless night, when the magical goose was sleeping peacefully and trustingly in its comfortable nest, and had no idea of the treachery coming, Thomas turned and crept toward it. With a "but," Thomas shut his eyes firmly to shut off the smashing guilt and the vision of those eyes that were full of love, and the magic light that was losing its brightness like a dying star, and he made a terrible single cut with his hands, and killed the beautiful magic creature. And when it was killed, the golden light faded away entirely, and there was the darkness of a curse, and the air grew cold. And then, frantically searching with shaking bloody hands, he opened its body and was met by no treasure trove of mountains of gold and rivers of treasure, as he had been promised by Marcus that it would be, but to his utter ruin, destroying horror like a soul-rending death, there was no gold in the goose. No gold, not by a single flake, just a dead bird that would never, ever lay another golden egg. And the shattering fact sank down on Thomas like a collapsing mountain, and he sank down on his knees in the bloody straw, screaming and weeping bitterly and uncontrollably at the thought of all this he had purchased by his greed. And he was rattled to death, and the dawn came, and there was no more golden egg in the empty nest. And tomorrow there would be no little David discovered his father weeping over the body of the goose and shouted in pain, "What did you do? You killed our friend! You murdered our magic goose!" and ran, crying hysterics away. And Marcus was not sorry, but bitter with rage that there was not gold inside, and he abandoned the family to follow through with his selfish kind of life, and it was not heard of again. But Thomas was reeking with guilt and grief, and buried the goose with trembling hands in a small grave behind the cottage, and had days of weeping without being able to eat or sleep. In 2 more weeks of grief, his thick, dark hair changed all over to white. Deep, painful lines cut themselves into his face, making him look 30 years older, and gradually he spent the rest of the coins they had, and sunk down into poverty worse than ever, because now he also bore unbearable guilt and shame, and people who heard what had happened stared at him with pity and disappointment. And Wilhelm would not say to Thomas, "I did. You had paradise and killed it." Thomas spent his last days sitting in the village well and telling his tragic story to anyone who would listen, particularly young people and children, and therewith warning them with tears streaming down his cheeks that I had had a miraculous gift of magic, which in the past would have kept my family and the children of my children and me generations after generation, but that I had allowed the poison of greed to enter my heart and corrupt my thankfulness, that I listened to the voices of selfishness instead of remembering my religious promise, and that in my foolish greed I had destroyed with my own hands that one which brought me fortune. And this was what village kids would hear as they sat in a circle and listened to old broken Thomas in his emotional story, told with such crude remorse that they would cry. And parents used the story of his heart to preach to their children that it is not so much the getting of evils as the giving of thanks that makes us happy, that patience is the secret of fortune, that thankfulness is the secret of success, and that the best of all things is being thankful, and to take wise care of the sources of our blessings, instead of, in moments of blind self-love, ruining everything that is ours.